you've got PCOS, you've tuned into this podcast, you've got some of the symptoms, you've got PCOS. How do you fix it?
Well, then simply enough, as Dr. Fung would say. So Dr. Jason Fung is obviously the co-author of the book. He's also a colleague of mine. I work with Dr. Fung and Megan Ramos at thefastingmethod.com, which is an online program for the intensive dietary management program. So Dr. Fung and I wrote this book together. And as he would say, he would simply put it, if the problem is insulin, Aaron, then the solution is to lower insulin. And how do we lower insulin? We lower insulin basically by doing two things. There's many other things you could do to help. You talked about one of them. So it's a major factor, not minor, stress, sleep and stress management, cortisol. That will have an impact on your insulin. But what are the two most important things that you have to do to address insulin? And this is the key factor of our book, because we want women to focus on what's actually going to help them. The problem with other literature on PCOS is that it talks a whole lot, but it doesn't focus on the root cause. A lot of the treatments recommended are symptomatic treatments, pills and this and that are actually not addressing insulin. The problem is insulin, and that's why we spend so much time talking about the things that you and I just talked about a little bit, more the science. You might not be so interested in that, and that's okay, as long as you understand that what's behind PCOS is higher levels of insulin. And the objective, the focus has to be lowering insulin. If women lose their focus into looking at the wrong places and dedicating too much time and effort into things that, yes, they're important, but they're not going to resolve the root cause of the problem. And I'm talking about things like supplements, exercise, and a whole bunch of other things. I'm not saying that certain supplements might not help symptomatically. I'm not saying that exercise isn't important, because we know it is. One, because it affects your mood, your muscle, body composition is important. You talked about cortisol. That's another great technique for helping with cortisol. But will exercise lower insulin? It will not. Okay. And the root cause of PCOS is hyperinsulinemia. So what are the two things that are going to help? Is addressing what you eat and how you eat. This is key, and women have to understand this, that this is what we need to focus on. This is what we need to put. You can do everything else if you're willing to and if you know what will help. But if you're not looking at these two factors, you're not going to have any significant impact on this condition.
Okay, so what do we eat?
Exactly. So looking at insulin, we know insulin is a natural hormone that our pancreas produces in response to eating, period. So we do produce insulin, but the problem is sometimes we produce too much insulin, and sometimes we produce too little. For example, children with type 1 diabetes, they have an autoimmune condition and they don't produce insulin. We don't want that. So we want to produce the right levels of insulin. But some people, like women with PCOS, produce too much insulin. So our objective is to try to reduce that insulin production by altering your eating, your diet, and how you eat. So what are the foods that produce the highest insulin response? Carbs. No, there's just no ands, ifs, or buts about this, okay? This is written in the book, but it's also written everywhere else. If you look into macronutrients, which means carbohydrates, protein, and fat, the macronutrient that's going to have the highest insulin production is carbs. Okay?
Right.
So this is the reason why lower carb diets and ketogenic diets get so much focus when we talk about PCOS, because these are the diets that are going to recommend a lower carbohydrate consumption. And I agree with that. All right. What's the problem with that for many women with PCOS? As soon as they hear this, they want to tune off because they're addicted to carbs, just like I was. They only want to eat carbs, so they want to find another solution. There is another solution, which is fasting. All right? But fasting does work better with a low carb diet. It's easier to fast if you eat less carbs, but it's a journey. Okay. So if you're going to eat less carbs, you're going to have appropriate levels of protein and higher levels of healthy fat. And right there, I've just described to you a ketogenic diet. All right.
Perfect.
We actually don't call it a keto diet in our book because we don't want people to we don't want them to lose focus and start looking at keto products.
Okay.
Sweeteners and ice creams, and because that's all.
SlimFast has a keto shake now. It just blows me away. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, because that's all going to raise your insulin. Remember that every time you eat, you raise insulin. So our objective here is to eat a real food diet that's going to have less of an insulin response, but it's also going to leave you free to have some gaps between meals when you're lowering insulin. That's called intermittent fasting or time restricted eating. So we're going to combine this real food, lower carb diet, ketogenic diet, if you want to call it that, with proper amounts of intermittent fasting. Okay. And I do a fertility sort of protocol with women or reproductive based on a woman's menstrual cycle. If they don't have a cycle, then we're trying to promote a cycle. And if they do have a cycle, we're sort of trying to follow the cycle to create a better eating pattern.